Here we go. Everyone, welcome to Quick Connect Live. Today's session, we're going to talk about psychological safety versus real safety. And it's kind of a spin-off from our previous session 2 weeks ago. And hey, Dina just told me that she can't make it. So looks like it's 3 of us for now. And if one of you is on Facebook groups or YouTube looking at this and would like to join us, do come on board Zoom. It's a lot more fun having people to talk to. Not that these two people with me aren't people, you know what I mean.
Oh man, so sad. You made it sound as if it was so lousy.
You are okay. No matter what I say, it will sound bad, so I'm gonna keep quiet. Suddenly, I don't feel very safe.
That's the point. You're supposed to feel unsafe. Whoa.
I'm going to if I can do a Zoom filter on you with some evil mustache or something, I'll do that right now. Okay, so how shall we start on this? Maybe a quick recap on the psychological safety we want on 2 line, and then we can go into what is the difference between psychological safety versus real safety?
So let's start with recognizing that psychological safety on its own as a concept is has 4 levels, right? They talk about ability to just express yourself. They talk about vulnerabilities before you talk about like the deeper levels. So if you remember, let me just pull it up again. 4 levels of psychological safety. Yeah. So a lot of people don't really we don't really cover these grounds because why is Google starting to check me as whether I'm a robot or not? This is so strange. Give me a second. Need to answer Google as to why I'm human. Yeah. So psychological safety is there are 4 levels, right? So the first level is included. Second level is safe to learn. Third level is safe to contribute, and 4th level is safe to challenge. So when a person talks about anything within a group, the ability to feel safe while communicating their message is really important as to create psychological safety. So, for example, within the 3 of us, if we wanted to say, hey, Alex, I don't really like the way you do this thing, it's okay. It's a challenge, right? But we're safe enough to have that conversation. Very often, we talk about safety is in, everybody gets to share. It's like we have a speaker's corner, but you're not supposed to challenge the government on it. It's the same thing when it comes to workplace or if it comes to home. If you're not allowed to actually question things, even though you say you have a space for it, that's not really psychological safety. So psychological safety is just the ability or the space where you're actually allowed, where you're not punished to do certain things. And it starts with you also having the mental space to be able to be psychologically safe yourself. Then external environment that actually provides the environment for you to be able to feel safe. You're mute.
Alex, you're muted, Alex.
We can't hear you.
Yeah.
Oh no, Alex, what happened to you? I completely cannot hear you. After we go live, we cannot hear you. What's wrong?
Now it's okay. Now it's okay.
We just heard you.
Okay, I think my mic for my
earpiece
is on.
What happened to your earpiece?
Yeah, no idea. I tried it this morning and it again people couldn't hear me when I was using it. So this I might need a new one. Oh well, Christmas present, guys. Thanks.
We've already bought you a birthday thing already, so it's okay.
Hi.
Okay.
So the last round, we spoke about trust, as the underlying for psychological safety, right? So
yep.
Even when you speak about the 4 levels, right? Safe to learn it.
Yep. So okay.
I mean, included safe to learn. Then there's a safe to discuss, is it? And then safe to challenge, is it? Something.
Safe to learn. Safe to learn. Safe to contribute.
Safe to contribute, and then safe to challenge. Yeah.
All right. So
yep.
Included, learn,
safe to learn,
contribute,
and challenge.
Challenge. To challenge. So usually it relates back to power, right? If you look at it.
Okay. So all these levels requires trust lah. Basically, do you have enough trust to reach that level?
Yeah. With this bunch of people that
Right.
you're talking to, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
Okay.
when we talk about this, right? Psychological safety also, when we talk about this is when you go to work, psychological safety plays a large part, but it's not even about conversations with people. It might be even whether you feel safe going to work. I mean, we also talk about psychological safety in the sense of, okay, so we want to talk about the fact that psychological safety is very much about the interpersonal grounds. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that
Because
means in the context of like working with someone else or conversing with someone else lah. You need to have
Yes.
people lah.
Yeah, but what is really interesting is there's a difference. Okay, but our responses are no different from the way we deal with real threats. The way our body responds to psychological triggers is no different from the way we respond to real physical threats.
So you're talking about like if you see a tiger in front of you, kind of a threat.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. So when we talk about this, right, this is why it's very important that we recognize that there is also this thing where people also destroy their own psychological safety when they're in interaction with certain people or certain scenarios because they create their lack of psychological safety.
Okay.
And
This
so
was
this,
birthed out of their own belief systems, right?
yep.
So they create I like to say they create the external environment based on their own internal environment.
Yes.
Something.
Yeah, based on their own internal mindset and beliefs that actually affects the way they interact with people or things. So when we talk about real safety, right? So when we talk about this, we're not also saying that a psychological safety thing is is a lot less important than real scenarios where your life is actually under threat, i.e., like actually being chased by a tiger, actually seeing things that are dangerous. We're not saying that the psychological safety is any less less valuable than actual safety issues. It's just that what we're talking about here is having a conversation about what people also create to feel unsafe themselves. So sometimes, okay, especially in this COVID period, right?
Oh, hi, Paylin's coming in.
Yeah. So I want to talk about this on the grounds of, now is the COVID period, right? Do you know anybody who's so terrified of COVID that they refuse to leave home? Hi, Paylin.
Hi, Paylin.
Hi.
Welcome.
Hey, nice haircut.
Thank you.
Yep. So I was just talking about this, right? So how many have you met people who are so terrified of going out there, even though so terrified of going out there into the real world, currently, because there's COVID out there? Do you know people who are terrified so much so that they refuse to get out of home?
Yeah, I know of someone. I know of someone who, when I remember that I went to the lift because the lift was small, right? Immediately that person suddenly he was standing at the back of the lift. Then the moment I stepped in, the person turned 180 degrees to face the back of the lift.
Wow.
Then that was a very awkward moment. Then the moment I clicked my floor and then I left the lift, then the person turned back 180 degrees. So I wonder what that means lah. But those happened during the COVID period.
Absolutely. And so this is what lack of safety feels like. And so when we talk about psychological safety, our responses again are the same. This is why psychological safety goes beyond just interpersonal relationship. It's even how we deal with every single day. How do we deal with the risk of, for example, catching COVID? And I think that's why this is an interesting conversation to have, because a lot of people don't know the difference between imagined crisis and danger and real danger, because we're brought up in environments where we actually mix the two up very, very often.
I mean, like you say, the body or the mind doesn't make a distinction between the two, right? I mean, even though it's imagined, it's real
to the person experiencing it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is why it's really important to talk about this, because then we know that our minds are actually playing tricks with us.
So I guess, are we then talking more about imagined? How do I put that? Imagined threats versus
Imaginary
real
threats,
threats.
yes. Okay,
Imaginary threats versus real threats. Are we talking about it? No.
it's something towards that extent. However, when we talk about this, we also look at I'm using this as an example to talk about how we imagine that the rest of the world would judge us, and therefore we lack psychological safety rather than because the world is actually not able to accept us. So this is also going back to okay. So psychological safety. Can I challenge the world on the status quo? Actually, a lot of people feel like if I were to say anything on the internet, I might be caught, I might be jailed. I might be put under Internet Security Act if I really air my opinions, because you see cases like what's his name, Amazi, or all these kind of people, right? So then when are we actually feeling free and psychological safe? These are the questions that I wanted to bring up today, because when is it real and when is it not real?
Is that something to do with like what's the imagined consequence versus actually what's the actual consequence that somebody will face in response to what the person did lah? Let's say, um, post something on social media, right? That's meant to be derogatory to other people's race or religion. Um, and then in a normal circumstance, you wouldn't. People might just ignore, right? But then suddenly, if you go for election, right, then then people start to look into your past and as such lah.
Yeah, we have a recent case of that, right?
Yeah. But I guess it's not just about real consequence versus imagined consequence. It's also about the person's belief in his or her ability to deal with that consequence, right? So I can imagine it could be the same consequence for people, but one person will go like, well, let the consequence come, I can take it, I can deal with it. The
Yes.
other person will like be totally
Distraught.
distraught or destroyed. So I guess then psychological safety, it's a function of a person's self-efficacy, if that's the correct word, right? The ability to deal with things. So if I'm more confident that I can deal with certain things, then I feel more psychologically safe to speak out or to do certain things because I know I can deal with the consequence.
And that's exactly what I wanted to talk about today, right? Because it is very important that we have this conversation about what is safety and what is not, what is out there in the real world and what is not. Because a lot of people feel psychologically unsafe during this COVID period and are high strung and are also acting up in certain manners with other people. We know the lady who did this, I'm sovereign, like the all these kind of different things. What's the reason that they behave this way? Why do they care so much about this stuff? This goes back to relations to how they view the world and how they want to manage themselves and what makes them feel safe.
I'm wondering, how does psychological safety even come about in that situation, right? So does it mean she felt psychologically safe to say what she said, or she just had no regards for the consequence, or what? I mean,
So if
that was an
do
interesting
you, do
case.
you okay, when people argue, are they feeling psychologically safe? That's the first question I would have to ask you since we started this conversation, this path. When a person argues, do they feel psychologically safe?
Likely not, because they might feel that they are being attacked. That's why they are arguing or defending.
Absolutely.
Usually more when they're insecure lah, in their thinking at that moment. Probably the threshold has already been reached, right? So then it became more like a defense mechanism, right, to put front. Yeah, so that's my thoughts.
Yep. Alex, your thoughts?
I'm going in 5 different directions. In that particular case, I don't think she felt safe, like she was hurt, but at the same time, she had this belief that they couldn't do anything to her because she was sovereign. It was kind of a weird, she was like, you can't do anything to me. I'm not under the police. I'm not under your law. I'm sovereign. That was like, which was kind of weird because I guess in her head, she had this belief that nobody could do anything to her. And so I'm trying to piece together, right? Does that mean that to her, she felt safe to say certain things because she so believed that she was sovereign? And, even though she felt that people were not aligned with her, it's kind of a weird thing for me. I can't quite put my finger on it.
Okay.
Mm.
Yeah, Jeff.
I don't know.
Your thoughts?
I'm not sure whether that was said out of spite or if let's say she's truly calmed down, she will actually say that I'm sovereign lah. So I'm not sure whether that belief is really that loose or was it that rigid in the first place. So was it just an act of because I'm being attacked, therefore I defend myself lah. Therefore I said
Yes.
that rather than actually I truly believe that lah. That's my sense so far. I don't think it was a genuine belief.
Interesting. But if it wasn't that genuine of a belief, why would she then refuse to follow the regulations of wearing masks and things like that?
She
Because-
probably felt unsafer. So she probably felt that it was worse for her to wear a mask than for her to actually. So she felt like her rights were taken away from her. So this is a very American thing, right? Where if you notice what the Americans did, they're saying that, oh, you're taking away my rights. I have the right to not wear mask. You have completely crossed the boundaries and attacked my own sovereign rights as a human being.
Right. So that belief about her sovereignty is still there, right?
Yes. So it is a defense of the sovereignty because these people feel like their life is under threat. If you watch a lot of the behaviors of the people that make fun that the individuals that keep being made fun of as why these people are so worried about all this kind of stuff, a lot of them are genuinely worried that their rights are taken away from them. If you look at Americans who were defending the right to not wear a mask, a lot of them feel threatened by the idea that this would overrule their own sovereignty, their own ability to live their own lives. And that's what they feel was at risk. Their life was at risk. That's why they lack the safety, and therefore they're willing to bear arms to defend it.
So I'm a little bit lost in our discussion right now. How do we get here, and what's that link to psychological safety versus real safety?
Most people do not have any form of psychological safety in general times. What I mean by this is that in general, majority of the time, why most people don't behave well or do not communicate well is because they lack psychological safety. They're imagining all kinds of things as threats to their lives. Even today, right? For example, Singapore has about 3 cases of asymptomatic COVID cases. Have you seen the people who panic? Does it seem logical to you that they panic at that level? Have you seen, remember when we first had the cases, number of people went to buy toilet paper?
Yeah, I was thinking of toilet paper.
Yep. Okay, so all those scenarios.
Okay, so I guess if psychological safety is a function of how we think or what we expect, then we come back to our talent teams, right? Someone with self-assurance would probably be, yeah, doesn't matter, I can handle it. And I'm guessing for Paylin, someone with positivity will go like, don't worry, this will blow over, things will be fine. And therefore you think more positively and therefore feel more safe. Would that be kind of how it works for people? I'm just linking and making a hypothesis. Right?
Hypothesis. It's a great hypothesis to have, right? So it's very common that there are people who feel absolutely safe regardless of what's happening out there in the world.
So let's ask Paylin, right? Since I see positivity in her talent team.
And my self-assurance, right?
And your self-assurance is there, right? You go like, it doesn't matter. In fact, I think when COVID started, you were one of those who were like, they're blowing the whole thing way too big until you had more data on it, right? So
yes,
you were so totally chill about it. So for Paylin, how were you when whole COVID thing started? I mean, with positivity, was it more like, oh, okay, maybe it's not as bad as people say, or what went through your head?
Actually, honestly, in the beginning, it was a little scary because of how people responded. So it's almost like a contagious effect. Then after a while, I decided I should just tune out all the negative news for a while. It's the positivity trait, right?
Yeah.
I feel that, okay, it's a stressful time. Maybe I should just stick to the positive news or not follow the news so closely. Just enough so that I'm updated, but not constantly be bombarded with all the bad news. That's how I cope with the situation.
That's very cool. Jeffers, how do you cope with the COVID situation?
How did I cope? I just generally quite okay leh. Okay, I dread the fact that I can't go back to office lah, but other than that, so far okay lah, I quite can settle at home, so it didn't really affect me that much. Okay lah, there was a period of time we couldn't get toilet papers also, because it was because people took it, right, and then when we really need it, right, because we only have one roll left, right, and then we couldn't find it, so that was a bit disturbing. Like, how come those who really need it can't find it, and those who stock up so many, right, then where do I find all those toilet papers, right? So but yeah, I think safety wise, yeah, I think quite generally okay. But I think the fact that the social isolation that take place after that as a result of working from home for prolonged periods does affect you lah in a fair bit. Like, you're not really bonding as much as your colleagues around you and things as such.
Okay, yeah. We'll continue down that part. That's actually a great
Yep.
conversation point to have as well. Alex, how do you handle the overall COVID situation?
Binge eat and stay at home. All right.
Being what?
Binge eat and stay at home. I think when circuit breaker came in and COVID came in, I was pretty much at home most of the time. Also because I have two elderly at home who were considered high risk and were a bit worried about the thing, right? So I think in this case, when you talk about real safety or real threat, I think there was a real threat for those who are considered to be in vulnerable groups. Of course, we reached a stage whereby like I still need to go out and have some social life and talk to people and not be cooped up at home and go crazy. So I was like kind of balancing it, it's like, okay, so risk of getting COVID at how many percent? What's the outcome versus risk of me staying at home and going crazy and risking my mental health. So the balance, right? So that's kind of how I weighed it, right? There's pros cons on both sides, and eventually I did go out and stuff. So yeah, that's kind of how I handled it.
Very cool. So, I mean, if we're going down this conversation path, right? One of the major things about this is, I mean, I personally quite enjoyed the alone time because I was having my own crisis in my own life at that time. Alex knows. But the other part about this was also really important, where I think during that time was where I discovered a lot about myself. So I was spending a lot of time thinking. But more importantly is I didn't feel at risk, partly also because there was very little interactions with people. But actually, once you're medically trained, like I am, a lot of things that people are worried about are like, I don't really think it is that dangerous for you to It's all about down to how do you moderate yourself? How do you actually step out there? What are you actually doing? Are you actually interacting with people? So post circuit breaker, a lot of people were still very, very afraid of coming out, even though the circuit breaker was over, because they were worried about catching COVID. And that's where the interesting conversations was really started, because majority of the cases are in specific places. The people who caught it were clearly from some clear clusters. And as a person who actually spent time looking at this, I'm going like, the risk of me and having minimal interactions with people, the risk of me getting COVID is so low that I don't see why people react to the level they are. And that's where the psychological safety comes into the picture. I'm saying this on the grounds of I know how to handle different parts of different things, meaning medically trained, knows the risk, know how to mitigate the risk, not being panicky about every single thing about this situation. It takes it because I'm trained and because I've seen too much stupid things happen to people in my medical experience. What happens is that you start realizing that the chances of you, if you actually were meant to fall ill and you are meant to really die, it's very hard to turn the tide. If you are flagrant and going out there and clubbing with a bunch of people and meeting a bunch of people, like 100 people at one go, yeah, sure, that's really on you. But if you're doing your daily life and you're minimizing contact with people, what's wrong with that? However, people are so afraid they can't even leave their home without feeling like they're going to go risk themselves. Meanwhile, there's a ton of people going to shopping malls thinking they're going to be perfectly fine and ignoring all the guidelines all the way through. This is where psychological safety comes very interestingly, right? There is flagrant disregard or neglect of real safety because they think they're psychologically safe. And then you have people who are actually feeling psychologically unsafe. And even though the reality is that it's not so risky, they'll never go and try things out. So this is what I'm actually talking about today. This includes relationships with people. So we also talk about this on the level of at the workplace. How often do people clarify with their bosses, their managers about what's actually happening? Should I actually do this or not? When can I get a raise? All these kind of different things, the ability to challenge also depends on the individual's ability to feel safe and handling the after effects of whatever you do. So I use the COVID situation as a good example of how people who are driven by fear would be terrified of leaving their homes because of certain reasons, right? And for other people who are a little bit more brave in the business or work front, they'll be more able to handle so-called the conversations at work and feel psychologically safe earlier than other people if they test the waters a bit earlier. And why I'm talking about this is really important because how do we know what's the difference between thinking that things are safe and actually knowing that things are safe? There's a difference between the two, right? And a lot of it comes with knowledge and training. How do you get there? That's the hard part. And that's what today's actually like, we spent a half an hour really unpacking this because how much of it is actually imagined, how much of it is actually something that we need to have conversations about to understand where the risks are, what are the things we need to do, and how to really have safety. And I think that's where the difference is, right? Today, at this day and age, right? Okay, let me ask you guys this question. How many of you actually drink tap water here? Right? Have you met those people who die must filter all water, even in Singapore? All right? What's the reason?
Certain fear of a bacteria or things like that. Yeah.
Right, so they say, oh, the water here is actually really dirty, right? They actually go into a lot of details into that.
I think when it comes to water and whether we want to drink from tap water, also depends on a person's tolerance. So I mean, when I see people put the filter and the filter comes out red and brown, and also because over a long time, right? And I don't know how far it's true, but they talk about how the pipes that they're getting quite old over long periods of time, so it does have certain impact on the quality of water. So you probably won't die from drinking tap water because of chlorine and everything. But some people say that it's not the healthiest. So for people who are very healthy, they go like filter or alkaline water and things like that.
Okay, as a person who loves drinking filtered water, and I can say this as a person who loves drinking it after filtering, which means that I prefer with filter, right? But that doesn't mean that it must be filtered. If not, I will die. Or it's about the mentality. Like there are people who would not drink tap water because they think it's dirty in Singapore, and it's possible. And there are people who feel that way. That is where your psychological safety, your own ability to assess things affects your psychological safety of existing even in this world. Does that make sense?
Mm.
And that's what I'm trying to refer to today, because that's what the really difficult topic is. How much is too much? When are you being too defensive? When are you defending things that are meaningless? Even when it comes to psychological safety at the workplace, or in conversations with your family, or in conversations with your friends. When are we actually imagining way too much and should be testing the boundaries rather than simply imagining all these things? Like there are people who are so terrified of certain things, if your food drops on the table, they refuse to eat it because they say, oh, it's very dirty. But the truth is, whatever was on the table was already in your plate, whether or not you believe so. And this is from a lot of bacterial studies, right? So as long as you go to a food center, there will be bacteria somewhere, somehow, someplace. But a lot of people who are panicking over these things when are they going to feel safe? When is it that they can check reality and get in touch with, is this actually safe or not?
I see that more as like, okay, like depends on the situation, right? So if I have a very negative emotional experience as a result of food poisoning, right? Maybe from some water that I drink, then later on I might develop that experience like, oh, the water is not safe, therefore I'm just going to filter my water from then on, right? Therefore I generate a new belief around that. Uh, then there are also another scenario in which I might encounter like, hey, actually that might not be true because actually out of 10 cases, maybe only I read the statistical report, only one kena, right? So actually 9 out of 10 times I might still feel safer. Uh, but I see that more in terms of dimension of if I'm going more factual to seek out the evidence versus hey, actually is my past belief measure up with the evidence that's presented out there or not. So I'll need to tally lah. Um, and in fact, it's what Alex had pointed out, right? Is that some part of the belief that got stuck somewhere, right? And then it never got checked and never get examined by the facts that were presented, and therefore we just live with it, lah. Then it came out as all these things, lah.
Yes.
Hey guys, I'm going to try something today. I created a mural board. Trying
Which
to
is not
put
surprising.
what we talked about.
Is that surprising?
And no. So I'm just going to send it over to you all and you can update it at the same time. I'm going to screen share. And that's kind of what I put together so far based on what we spoke about, right? So
You're
psychological safety.
so excited about this. Okay, yeah.
This is fun. So we talked about trust, we talked about self-efficacy. See, now I can summarize the way you do it. You know, in strengths, we talk about 3 ways to mitigate weakness, right?
Yeah.
We talk about strengths innovation, how you can use the talents that we have. We talk about complementary partnership. That's when I throw everything to you, Ethan. And then the third one is
How is that complementary? Okay, no wait. Okay.
So we discuss and then you take note. So this is what I have put together. This is the systems and process part, right? Of what we've talked about. I think I'm missing beliefs, right? So beliefs.
Yep, beliefs. Yep. This is nice. So, I mean, I'm just going to continue a little bit more into this space because that's why it's important to have this conversation. Because to me, once we actually have a conversation about what truly is safe and what isn't, that's when we can start looking for creating safety for people. Yeah. And so, have you met people who are resistant to science? Meaning, no matter how much science you give them, they will never agree with you.
You mean like the people who believe that the earth is flat?
Yeah. Flat earthers, you know, the kind of people.
Yep.
Yeah. I dealt with a lot of them. And I actually quite like those people. Very often they truly believe what they are true believers of what they say. Yeah. Okay. So one of the major things as you're typing all of this, right, is while Japheth actually goes out there to research new information to see whether something is true, how many people do that?
Not many, right? And I guess there's a lot of false information. So even if you do research, how do you know what is right? So even research is kind of challenging, right?
Absolutely. And it's a very tedious process. And not everybody knows where to look for what information that is relevant and whether you trust the official documentation, which is something that, you know, some people say, why can you trust mainstream media? All these scientific articles are made up. There are literally people saying that. So how do we create psychological safety where we go? Especially when there's no evidence, you don't know what is safe and what isn't. I'm saying this as an extreme example, but at the same time, how do we create psychological safety in our lives while creating real safety?
I will see it as, and you can come on the board and look at the things that is important. So for me, I think the parts that we can control are things like our belief systems as well as our self-efficacy, right? So how can we equip ourselves with more skills, more knowledge so that we know that if something happens, we have confidence to deal with it. And then the belief systems is largely, I guess, belief about ourselves, which also ties back to efficacy, right?
So okay. So I think the knowledge part is one thing what Alex pointed out. Right. I mean, how do you source out evidence? Like even finding the source of the material and questioning that source sometimes might take time, right? But then to be honest, realistically, do people really have that kind of time to do it lah? We spoke about vulnerability, I think 2 sessions ago, and one of the things that vulnerability poses is really being able to take risks, right? Even though that at that moment you think it's true, and maybe people might really judge you out there because maybe the facts you're presenting is false news that you've been reading throughout your years, and somebody corrected you. So I do feel that in a way is also to really discover what's real and imagine you might really need to take that risk at times. Uh,
Yes.
and
Keep
and
going.
and yes, and then because people correct you, of course, then there's another part whether you are willing to accept it or not lah. When people correct you, but I do feel vulnerability is one of the ways in which you really need to put yourself out there lah. Yeah.
That's exactly it, right? So I will actually jump in and like I don't know how to put in a textbook. I'm just gonna jump into the mirror and just do this, right? And I want to put in experience. The word experience is really, really important for me because I realize that majority of people actually fail to recognize the value of experience in actually learning what is a boundary and what isn't a boundary, what is safe and what isn't safe. Until you deal with a fire, you're never going to know what a fire feels like and whether you're safe next to a fire. Does that make sense? Right? So if you don't allow kids to explore, would kids ever be able to know whether a fire is actually safe to go near to? What's the safe distance from the fire? And how do you handle a fire safely? And especially because you're a parent, Jeffeth, I'm pretty sure this is very relevant for you. Letting your kids experiment, right?
Yeah. I think there's two parts, right? One is the lived experience to accompany just the knowledge. The other thing is the learning point or the conclusions drawn from the experience will shape the belief. So it is very important to have that discernment. Actually, what that learning point is, because you don't want to generalize until like, oh, like suddenly like all tap water are bad, right? All tap water is bad, so I shall filter them. So then you are creating something that is becoming, I don't know, disinhibiting for someone else later on. Yeah. So I
bring in
thought,
contextual understanding. I love
yeah,
I love what you're saying. Is that Troy? Is that
yeah,
true?
yeah. I think that's under what context you apply that, right? From your learning points, right? So and under what context you do not. Yeah, I think most people generalize it too much that we don't have that discernment. Which is something that you can continue.
I know. I love what you're saying. I love what you're saying. And just want to continue. Discrimination, xenophobia, and everything is based off lack of contextual understanding. Would you agree with that? People who are racists, who are attacking certain types of people regularly, assume a bunch of things about them because of very isolated anecdotal evidence that form their beliefs due to family upbringing, due to certain circumstances in their lives, and they conclude it for the rest of their lives, but they fail to recognize the contextual experience. That this belongs to one person, this belongs to a situation, this belongs to a unique situation that you experience, or somebody in your family experience and relate the story to you to try to paint a story that they are right. And that's really important. Psychological safety cannot exist if you do not have knowledge, experience, and contextual understanding. Did I hit the verse? Yeah.
I'm just trying to link contextual understanding to something here.
What are you thinking of? What are you thinking of?
Where does this go? I mean, this is part of knowledge and training, isn't it?
Contextual understanding is okay. Actually, this is where I think when we talk about lived experience, right? One thing I've learned throughout my life was you can never replace lived experience.
Mm.
And this is something that, as much as how many of you have grown up with your parents telling you don't need to go and experience it for yourself? You just watch other people, just learn from their lessons. Can really don't need to go through yourself. How many of you have parents who told you that?
So this is about.
I think we all have lah.
Oh, everybody, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But actually, once you actually stepped out there and actually experienced the real world, right? You start going, no, I can never replace this experience because I know the nuances and the details of how this happened. Can you learn how to train a people? Or how do you be a good trainer just by imagining being a good trainer and doing that for the rest of your life?
Mm.
Can you be good at Strengths Finder without actually reading any Strengths Finder, without using it in real life, without using it on anybody?
I guess the difference, I think is the difference between I learned this from Bible studies, right? The difference between the Greek word to know is the head knowledge, and the Hebrew word to know, which is to experience, right? To have gone through.
Do you know the specific words? Because I'm trying to read it back to them.
I don't have the specific words, but I can go and find. But
Is it what,
culturally,
Not logos, right? Nothing to do with logos, right?
no, logos is logic.
Actually, logos is not logic, it's existence.
I mean, it's where the word logic came from, right?
Yeah.
So I can't remember where it is, but I read it somewhere to say that, you know, if you go to the Greeks and ask them whether, for example, could coffee beans be planted in this country, they will go like, you know, based on the latitude, longitude, based on the acidity of the soil, yes, you can probably grow coffee beans, that kind of thing. If you go to a Hebrew,
A Jewish.
and ask them, could it be planted? The person will say yes or no based on whether they've actually seen it.
Yep.
So the difference between having personally seen and experience versus the head knowledge kind of thing, right? So I think we are brought up in education in a very kind of Greek culture, head knowledge. We learn about things, we read about things, and then rather than we experience it. It's the difference between how we've been taught that we can travel the world by reading a book.
Not true.
Actually traveling.
We know that it's not true.
Right, but I mean, there's even a Chinese proverb for that, right? Something about,
Yes.
I can't remember what it was, but this is kind of the thing.
So actually, that's actually a false belief about Greek word itself. From my experience, the thing is that the Greeks were high experimenters. They experimented a lot. So I wouldn't say that they are just purely logic. If you're talking about it, they are probably referring to the people who are completely Socratic only, which is a very limited bunch of people. And I think this is where it's really interesting, right? So I agree with you fully. Is it head knowledge or is it lived experience where you understand the nuances? There are many things that cannot be abstracted into language, technical understanding. Okay, I disagree. Actually, I'm trying to turn everything into technical understanding, so I cannot say that. I'm trying to
about tacit knowledge.
Tacit knowledge. I love that. Okay, yeah. Tacit knowledge requires lived experience, right? You need to have the stories, the actual experience. You need to smell what happened in the space. You need to have seen it for yourself. You need to hear the experience itself. You need the full body experience in order for you to understand. Truly understand. Because head knowledge comes without the senses and the experience involved. Why people actually fail to have psychological safety is because they have no tacit knowledge.
Sorry, tacit knowledge means lived experience, is it?
It's close to lived experience, right, Jeffeth?
Sorry, yeah.
It's
more like implicit knowledge, or that it's very hard to transfer to somebody just by writing or verbalizing it. Like something that you learn. It's just something that you intuitively know how to say things, but you find it very hard to transfer to someone else to teach.
Yep. which is why it's so difficult for him to communicate that, because that is also tacit knowledge. There's a reason why we use jargons in different fields. In the field, if you're a practitioner of the field, the jargons means certain things that are actually tacit knowledge to non-jargon based people.
So here's something that I'm trying to have more discernment. So let's say somebody who doesn't have a fresh person, fresh grad, who doesn't know anything, right? But still feel very safe to just speak up, but might not know, right? Because in a vulnerable space, it's just like everything is new, right? I just go out there and make mistakes. Uh, he or she doesn't have tacit knowledge, but he or she could feel safe enough to speak up. So I would see, I mean, based on what Alex has put together visually so far, is maybe it's, I don't know, something around like if you have more of this tacit knowledge, I mean, it's something related to the confidence of speaking up will be more robust in that way over time, rather than being scarred the moment you be vulnerable the first time out and people tell you that or sorry, not to my experience.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting, right? So there is two ways of handling like when you only have had knowledge and you don't have any tacit knowledge, or real lived experience knowledge. Okay, anybody here who plays any sports or likes any particular sports?
Rock climbing.
Rock climbing, right? Can you rock climb while just by staring at people rock climbing?
No. But I guess you can't. But a lot of things can be learned by watching other people rock climb as well. So you need both.
Yes, this is where it's really important. Both the Greek, that Greek version of head knowledge, and what the Hebrews do, the Jews do, is very much both centered. You need to both have experience and head knowledge. It's not enough to do, it's also not enough to think.
Okay.
If you only do, you will get stuck because you're not able to improve on the system and have more diverse contextual knowledge, be able to apply or cross-apply different things across different fields. For example, if a person just uses purely non-head knowledge, they will not be able to watch the match of their opponent in a tennis match or like rock climbing, right? You learn a lot from watching rock climbers after you have rock climbed yourself. If you've never rock climbed yourself, do you know what to look out for? Do you know what to understand, what to see, how to understand what's going on?
Okay.
So this is why both head knowledge and lived experience is really important for psychological safety to be able to exist in people's lives. Because why is COVID so dangerous and so scary? It's not because COVID itself is scary. Actually, if you look at the death rate right now and you look at the numbers again, it's it's because it's highly viral, because there are certain reasons, therefore it is dangerous. But the most important reason as to why countries went into lockdown was because we didn't know anything about it. There was no lived experience. There's no intricate understanding of what the virus did, but it spread like crazy. So in order to prevent real damage from happening, the chance that real impactful damage will happen, we decided to lock down the countries. That is a prudent method, but that doesn't mean that COVID itself is a very, very, very deadly disease. Does this make sense? So on a medical grounds, I mean, when we talk about this, what is real safety versus psychological safety?
Yep.
And this is the same thing. A lot of psychological safety is also because we don't have the ability to understand how to interact with people in case conflict happens. How to manage when you challenge somebody and they disagree with you. You don't know how to manage when, how to get yourself included. Have you met those people who, no matter what, expect everybody to invite them even though they don't put themselves out there? They're very passive on the side. You try to include them. They're like, okay, then only when you specifically reach out to them, then they'll come in. But then, right, they'll always complain they're not being included. Psychological safety is very complex because it requires both parties. And when we talked about trust last week, 2 weeks ago, it was just the beginning of the story. Everybody takes a large part in creating the psychological safety of their own lives by the way they interact with other people. Because if they do not test and they do not have head knowledge and lived experience to be able to move forward, it's very hard for them to know what is actually safe and where is actually safe. Today, a lot of silence. I think this topic is a little bit heavy. Sorry, guys.
No, lah,
It's quite profound, actually. Sorry, Jeffers. Yeah, go ahead.
I'm digesting and putting the pieces. So I see it in a couple of ways to link it back to the previous sessions that we covered, right? Because one of the definitions we covered by psychological safety, and then maybe there's more vulnerability, right? Vulnerability is really the ability to speak up and taking that risk, right, of being judged. And I think today you covered. I suppose one of the things that you covered today was more on like as applied to self, right? There's this real and imagined assessment of the situation, right? And
Yes.
that might introduce certain fear or anxieties in our life, right? And that in effect, because we are anxious or we are fearful, we might not act in a behavior of sort of a spirit of trust when we interact with others, right? Depending on what we perceive in that context. And then that comes in that complicates even further is our beliefs about ourselves, right? Which contributes to that imagined situation and the perceived consequences that build that up even more. The effect that and what you're saying so far is with enough life experience and knowledge, like knowledge seeking around evidence and contextual understanding, we might be able to have more discernment in terms of what is real and what is imagined real.
Yeah.
Right, and that would in effect help us to be I think more grounded in our approach. I must say more grounded in our approach, right? When we interact with others, at least we know when not to panic and when to stay calm.
Yeah, I like what you're saying. Pei-Ling?
I'm just thinking about the experiences when COVID first started. I think in the beginning, there wasn't a lot of information about the virus and things are pretty new. So going out seems a little bit uncertain. So there's a bit of anxiety involved. But as time goes by, when there's a little bit more information, but the information about the virus is also very conflicting. But what made the difference for me is when I step out of the place and I've been out and about for a few times, it starts to feel a bit more comfortable. So maybe that's when the lived experience comes in, because you realize you've been around and you're still alive, you didn't get the virus yet. So you start to think, okay, maybe I am safe. Even though the head knowledge part probably is about the same for me, at least.
And that's what creates safety, right? Actually, it's the lived experience that creates safety for us. Yeah,
Exactly.
Yeah. Alex?
I was just trying to add that piece in about availability of information. So I guess in Singapore, we're quite fortunate because I guess also because we're small, it's fairly well controlled and people do believe and people manage it, right? As opposed to we're seeing on the news now, some people who are saying that the whole pandemic is a hoax. And then they go like...
Still, it's been saying since the start, but I see people are still saying it after so many months.
Yeah. So I go like, I mean, even with information out there, people still say that. Then it's like... So it's... Yeah, I think the something being new and there's not enough information on it definitely does affect the psychological, how safe people feel. Because when you know about something, you know what to expect, you know how to manage it. So that's kind of the knowledge part, right? Yeah, but I think there's a difference between knowledge as in, well, the person doesn't bother to go and find out and learn about it, versus knowledge as in no one knows yet, which was exactly what COVID was when it started, because no one knows anything about it. And that generates a lot of fear. So it's just trying to, how do I put it into this thing? So I just kind of thank you, man.
Yeah, I find you loving this mirror exercise, clearly, and no, I'm loving the feedback
My
from
learning
everybody.
process.
Yeah,
This is my learning process. I'm structural.
yeah, it's great. And because today I went kind of floaty about the concepts because it's. I mean, I'll be frank. This is also one of the first few times I'm actually talking about it at this level, where we're actually technically kind of head on into this zone of what exactly is going on out there, why people don't feel safe when it comes to communicating at the workplace or even uh, being open to sharing their own experiences out there. And the reason why I'm so passionate about this is because very often I see people using "I don't feel safe, I don't feel psychologically safe" as a weapon against other people who they say that, "Oh, you don't make me feel safe, so so you're the problem." And I see this as a very common issue also at, like, when you're talking about coaching or teaching, when you're actually dealing with clients that are maybe a little bit more resistant and therefore being able to weaponize the way you make them feel against you, which is a real thing. And then we want to add on to this is also at home, or even in the spaces around us. Passive aggression is a very, very dangerous and scary thing. When a person gaslights you, they're using psychological safety, now that is a popular word, against other people in the space. And I've seen this happening in government bodies. I've seen this happening in MNCs. I've seen this happening in SMEs, where people who are a little bit more savvy with these words are using it as a threat against other people in the workplace. And that's why, actually, to me, this topic is very relevant because it's very real. There are a lot of people experiencing issues regarding psychological safety. It is underdiagnosed and overdiagnosed at the same time. It's like depression, like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Uh, so to responding to your point, I feel that it's just like because people don't really understand it, so this concept came about, right? So I just lump everything around this concept, and this concept gets even bigger, right? And actually, it just means that we don't really understand what the problem really is about, right? Specifically, yeah. You continue on your depression. I just wanted to comment on that point.
I love. Okay, it's all good. I'm happy that you jumped in, right? So, one of the major things that I think a lot about is when can we? Okay, so this is part of my research work because I'm trying to be able to measure how do you measure impact in a company in a format that allows you to actually know whether your L&D and your training actually impacts the people. Because right now, I had a lot of discussions with L&D people, and one of the conclusions is there's no real conclusive gold standard to go back to in terms of L&D learning and development of people within the workplace. And one of the major reasons is because people are not honest because they don't feel psychologically safe. Is it because of the company or is it them? People don't have communication in the workplace. Is it because of the culture of Singapore or is it because the companies are not safe? These are so many questions that we cannot answer because the ability to understand what psychological safety is and what real safety is, it conflicts the moment you start bringing in an active agent, meaning each individual person is added into the equation, and you have to consider the thoughts, their emotions, and the way they perceive the information.
And actually, I think that it's kind of captured here, right? Of the different things. So when you talk about things like culture, bosses, or whatever, that actually comes in the consequence part. That's external part, right? Right. So I think culture and everything fits in here. And then the other part is about your beliefs. That's the person themselves. What does the person believe about the culture? How does the person believe about appropriate behaviors? And that also varies from country to country, culture to culture, and things like that. So if you put all those in, so you put like culture, right? Other people, external people, or just other people, right? Other people, right? And all those feed into this thing called consequence because they affect the consequences. Kind
Okay.
of, right?
Yeah, I see what you mean. Okay, so I just want to expand upon how you're going about this, right? Like
Mm.
the problem with this is that because beliefs are so fluid, and it depends. I've told you guys about this thing called splitting, right? Borderline personality disorder or like anti-personality disorder, anti-social personality disorder. These people do what we term as splitting, meaning they turn into different identities. But actually, most people do splitting, meaning they play different roles in different places. You know, a person who is like a ruthless CEO goes back home, acts like a beach bum. That story, like which I always repeat about my cousin, always reminds me that a person changes their beliefs and their values according to what situation fits them. It's like the same as how people go to church on Sunday, are really pious Christians in church, walk right out and start shouting and yelling at people. Right?
Yeah.
It's the same kind of thing.
Yeah. So I mean, when I talk about beliefs, then I'm talking about beliefs in a specific context, right? So some people would believe that if I speak up, the grass that sticks out gets cut off or chopped
Yep.
off. Right? Or another person believe that, oh, when I do speak out, I get more respected. But these are all beliefs, right, of how things do work or should work. That impacts how the person behaves.
Yes, it does. And so if we want to continue down this path, right, one of the major factors about all this kind of conversations is how do we create our own psychological safety in a world that feels unsafe? I think this is what I'm trying to get through today. Like, and therefore, the topic name wasn't really quite exact. I realized that what I was trying to achieve with today's topic was really about how do you actually feel safe as an individual in this day and age, while the rest of the world feels so unsafe and feel like everybody's under attack all the time. That's the hardest question for me.
I'm wondering whether our talent teams have a part to play in that. Because I underlying our talent teams, right? There's quite a lot of belief, I think. Like positivity, I tend to believe that, well, it's better to be positive than to look at the negative side of things.
Mhm.
So in using our talents in that sense, we have already sort of have a certain belief that has been shaped, which might be unconscious to us.
I love that conversation. I actually then this is when I need you strengths finder coaches to tell me more about how you would look at this, in a manner that how do you bring a person who is deliberative, who is futuristic, but at the same time cautious, right? And not really able to, like, they have a tendency to overthink. How do you manage a person so that they can gain more psychological safety to be able to speak their mind in different scenarios?
So if I look at the entire piece here, okay, why don't we do an experiment, right? So for
Sure.
all of us who are on, I realize that everybody has left the mural board. You can come
No, I'm
back.
looking at your screen lah. So you anyway are filling in ma.
So where? Thanks, guys.
But I get the visual trigger, so
Okay, so
that's great.
of everything that's here, I guess the question is which point, or let's pick 2 points, right? That do you feel is pivotal in our discussion today that affects psychological safety? So if you had to pick 2 words or 2 boxes, where would you put?
I will put, oh yeah, now I'll put the tick there. Hold on, shapes. Nope.
I can
Is
do
it-
voting actually.
The voting. Miro also can do voting. Okay, can.
Yeah, and then I'll put ticks. I'll put ticks. Come on, I'll put ticks for you. Give me a sec. Very easy.
Actually, I believe that the person this is a, I don't know if you can see my mouse.
Okay, so we will just put it. Okay, where do you say you put it?
Head knowledge and lived experience is the only decider of psychological safety to me.
So for Ethan is here lah.
Yep.
Okay. Jeffers?
Can I put two?
Yeah, put 2 lah.
One
Where-
is real versus imagine. That's the first one. The second one is also knowledge and personal experience.
Okay, so Ethan, you want to put just one or you want to?
I'm happy with one because to me, real versus imagine is actually very much related to the hit versus lift.
Okay. Really?
Yeah.
I'm wondering, where does feelings fit in?
Feelings are affected by beliefs. So if I were to say beliefs is the okay, so depending on the different field of psychology, right? But what I would say, beliefs creates feelings in response to situations. So if I believe that this should be we should nobody should be aggressive, I will feel violated by a person acting aggressive. But if I have a belief that aggression is normal, when a person gets aggressive, I don't feel I'm okay. You know what I mean?
I'm
Hmm.
curious about what feelings Palin referring to when you ask this question.
Yeah, because I think when I think about the term psychological safety, right, the first word that comes to mind would be like anxiety, feeling vulnerable. So it's a very feeling kind of a thing. Yeah, but
Understood.
definitely for me, head knowledge versus life experience, that's important. The other thing is how you feel about the situation.
Okay, so things like anxiety and vulnerability.
Stress, even under stress, when you talk to somebody who is aggressive. So those are real signal that tells you that you are in danger or imagine danger. You're not really in danger. Nobody is going to kill you, but you just
So,
feel that
so Pei-Ling,
you're in danger.
to your point, that is why I put under versus real and imagine.
Okay.
Because many of the times after you talk to someone else, you realize, hey, actually the situation is not that bad. I'm really thinking
Yes,
about it
yes,
too much.
yes.
Therefore, I put the other thing is the real versus imagine. Is it really real or is it really imagine?
Yeah.
Or did I blow it up because it happened on the spot and I get triggered, right? And all sorts of inner demons come haunting me. And then after I talk to people, I realize that, hey, actually those are not founded based on their life experience.
Yep.
Correct? Then
Yeah.
Ethan will tell me like, hey, you're just making things bigger than it seemed lah. That's what we usually hear from other people, right?
Yeah.
It's not that bad. But
But the thing is, it
Alex will
depends
pose you a
on.
lot of straight questions. What did you do next? What did you do next?
I'll be more like I want to
What's-
understand what's your belief.
yeah, what
What's
do
your
you
belief?
believe about this situation?
Yeah, like where did your belief come from? Like let's dig into that.
Yeah. In
Right,
a way,
Alex?
in a way, it is the way I see it is that sorting out their beliefs will represent it in a way that to sort out what's real and imagine again and again, right? Then realize, hey, I break this belief now. Hey, actually, it's not that bad. So whatever I'm seeing now, is it maybe realer than what it seems? I don't think there will always be a super accurate picture because we are always distorted by the facts that's presented lah. But it's just what is truer to what we see at the moment probably will give us less anxiety lah.
So for Palin, where will you put your ticks?
I guess that is real and imagine if you want to put feelings under that.
I influence you.
The adaptability theme always gets influenced.
It's okay. Your positivity is also well appreciated at this moment.
Thank you.
Because you feel that it's positive that you got this rather than feeling violated. It's all good.
Okay, Palin, you can put one more.
I can put one more.
Put two.
Yeah, so head knowledge versus lived experience as well.
I'll put here. Finally, I feel off. Okay.
Oh, where are your ticks?
Strength finder coach comes in and goes talent.
No. Some efficacy.
Okay, no. So which you might not be wrong. I mean, it's how we want to view it, right?
Yeah, I'm not saying I'm wrong. I'm just saying that it's different. The other one that
Of course, you'll never say you're wrong. You're Alex. Sorry. Yeah.
I have such good friends.
Well, Alex also put real versus imagine, but maybe Alex, you have a different view around what we have spoke so far lah.
Well, I think a lot of times when we talk about real versus imagine, for me, I agree because a lot of times, the acronym of fear, right? False experiences appearing real. And I think a lot of it is like that. We don't dare to take a step to test out. Hence, the word testing here is important, right? To test out and see whether what we think is true. So I was listening to a podcast by the podcast by Gary Chapman, the guy who wrote Five
Love
Love Languages.
languages.
And one of the hosts said this, right? We need to test. What they said? We need to. Can't remember whether the word was test our faith. But we need to also test our doubts. So the part about testing the doubts or validating the doubts is interesting because that's where it's testing boundaries and testing what's imagined, right? Just that the focus is different. It's about, hey, look, I doubt this. I have these doubts. How do I test or how do I validate this doubt, whether it's true? And that part I thought was interesting. Okay, so that's kind of where we are, right? The real imagine is like one of the key things in helping us to get real safety because we need to test it out. And part of it, I guess, that's where everybody put head knowledge versus lived experience because that actually helps you to differentiate the real imagine, right? And for me, it comes back to a lot of self-efficacy because I think, even if you had imagined consequences that were not real, but you feel you could deal with it, feel safe, right? So I think whether or not the consequence is real or imagined, as long as you have the capacity and capability to deal with that consequence, I think that plays a very key role in psychological safety. You could even, up your level to a degree whereby you're preparing for a consequence that will never happen.
Yes.
Right? But you still feel safe. So, you could then waste a lot of time and energy, right, in doing that, but you still feel safe. So for me, the self-efficacy part is quite pivotal for me in this entire piece.
I hear you, and I think that's a very fair point that you made. I mean, I wouldn't change my answer, but I really like what you're saying. Like, I disagree on the grounds of I see what is pivotal by what people don't view is important, but it's pivotal. But I agree with you in the sense that because self-efficacy makes a lot of sense. Like right off the bat, it's very duh, right? But then it's a different thing when you talk about lived experience and having to go and experience. I mean, that's the only reason why I disagree. Not because fundamentally it's not a disagreement. It's just more like what is more important to me.
So, looking at time, we have 30 minutes left, and I think this would make a fantastic tool for summarizing.
Yep, you can keep doing it. I will always do my verbal ways, but yes.
Yeah, please go ahead and
okay.
summarize.
But let's talk about let's go through everybody what you've learned this session and how do you think it's helped you.
Maybe before I go through that, just want to probably share why I chose this tool. Maybe
Sure.
I already shared with
Absolutely.
Paylin. I chose Real and Imagine. I mean, just to add on what Paylin also shared with regards to that is I feel that in many ways, because we go back to how do we develop tacit knowledge over time, right? As we grow in our own ways in area of work and area of influence. And one of the things that we step out and we have all these imagined realities which we think is real, and then we have someone either correct us or we actually went to test it out ourselves and we realized that we were wrong, and our perception or realities get corrected. Or the other way I would put it that way is the uncertainty, like you put in COVID, right? All these imagined realities start popping up because we do not know. And of course, I think a couple of ways to move forward when we say, is it really just about being vulnerable and put ourselves out there? I think in essence, yes, because otherwise, how would you ever build up the muscle, right? Because without going through the life experience, you need to put yourself out there, correct? And to learn either that skill. But I think you can make it such that it's slightly easier. One way is to speak with people who has a life experience.
Yes.
Like bounce off that someone else, and someone else might give you the advice and you might feel a bit safer to try things. The other one is you speak to a coach, right? And a coach come to tell you that actually after you talk to yourself through the questions that I ask you, you realize that actually a lot of these things is what you have imagined. And therefore you feel safe now to go out and try things. And therefore that is another way to start to build that live experience. Because one of the ways in which coaches do is also to connect your experience towards new knowledge, right? Because you may have a repertoire of knowledge, but you just can't connect to new knowledge that you are now learning, right? So you need to reflect, right? And therefore part of the reflection is to realize, hey, actually, based on these new concepts, I see things in a different way. So that's all I want to add on, and those are the things that I'm learning.
Very cool.
Okay,
That's very cool. I like that. Palin, any thoughts?
For me, I think what really, when I think about psychological safety, strangely, I always think about it in the training context, during my work context, how like creating it for my learners. So today it has sort of expanded to beyond that, like how do we in our day-to-day lives actually experience psychological safety. So I've never really think about what makes me feel safe. So now I at least know there is head knowledge, there is lived experience. So lots of things to think about.
Very cool. I'll ask Alex for his opinion before I do a summary, using the wonderful knowledge that he has crystallized onto our Miro board.
I mean, for me, it's the reminder to test our assumptions in terms of the consequence of our fears. Because I guess a lot of us could be living, well, under unfound doubts and fears that need not be there in the first place. And that could be an easy solve, right? As testing might not be that much, or sometimes it takes a little bit of courage to, like you say, have lived experience and see if it's true. By that, I don't mean go and test and see if you can get COVID. By that, I mean that, some of the other things, the workplace, whether we try to communicate with people, things that are a bit, more gray, would probably be some areas that we can go in and
Start with lower risk things, such as talking to somebody you care about. So actually, we talk about levels of vulnerability next week, and that's literally what I'm going to talk about in training your lived experience.
So I don't. So one thing I want to add, I think back to Ethan, right, which is the real versus imagined safety, right, or psychological safety, right, is actually what's the impact of the consequence, right? When you talk about real safety, there's probably loss of life when you get eaten by a lion, right? But I mean, like really, let's say really imagine safety, losing. I mean, let's say really. Sorry, don't mean to rub. Losing a job, let's say per se, right?
Yep.
I mean, to be honest, as compared to that situation, is it that bad? I mean, really, lah. I mean,
Compared to being eaten by a lion, absolutely, it's a very different scenario.
It's a very different scenario. So is some of this imagined consequence really that bloated up, lah, or inflated as we really see it, lah? And therefore, all the adrenaline rush and fear, fight or flight comes in, right?
As if it's real, as if you're being
as
eaten
if it's
by a
real,
lion.
right? As well as anxiety attacks and depression that comes along with that.
Yep.
Okay, back to you, Ethan.
Thank you very much for sharing, everybody. Like, I think the other thing is, I'm really glad is that because we're having a very interesting high level conversation here, because we're looking at it in training context as well as individual context. I think this is where I really enjoy it, right? So what I actually started this whole session with was trying to get to this point where we recognize that a lot of reasons for the loss of psychological safety has nothing to do with the environment we're in. It has everything to do with what we think the environment we're in does to us. And that's exactly where we got to, right? Do we have the experience to know how to deal with this? Why is it that people have stage fright? Because they're worried. They have certain ideas about certain things. Getting eaten by a lion is very different from, speaking on stage, but your physiological response is exactly the same, right? So that's when we need to start recognizing that psychological safety is how we deal with the images and the ideas we have in our heads to manage the situation that we're dealing with. And so in order to achieve this understanding, we need to develop a lot of head knowledge and lived knowledge to be able to understand and properly manage all the situations. And so one of my favorite ways of describing this, actually, I have a friend who actually said this to me previously. You never know what a person's capable of until they do it, right? He was saying this in a manner to say that nobody is fully trustworthy, not because they're not trustworthy, because you never know what the real experiences will happen, right? Like a person can be put at gunpoint and to kill somebody else. Therefore, you end up being a killer. But Is that really fair to say? All these kind of things, knowing what your boundaries are, testing your boundaries, testing how far you'll go, needs to be tested, needs to be not acknowledged in order for you to understand what real safety is. And in order for us to really be vulnerable, we first need to know what safety is to us and then slowly push the boundaries ahead. And that's why the levels of vulnerability really comes back into the picture. Because the levels of vulnerability as you as a person is not about how other people view you. It's how vulnerable you're willing to be such that people can feel safe around you. And I think that's really important. And especially as trainers and coaches, the more vulnerable we are. By the way, I've realized that the more full of crap that I am, and the more honest I am with my friends, the more I have better impact on the way they look at things. Because the more human I am to them, the more they seem to like what we talk about. The more they like what we talk about, the more willing they are to listen to what I have to say, to change what they think. And that's why it's really important that when we look at this, right, our own vulnerability affects our ability to affect other people and therefore change the psychological safety of other people. So that's why it's very important that we know that a lot of times when we feel fear, it is imagined, it is not real. It is because we're having a physiological response similar to that of being eaten by a lion that we are feeling unsafe. And that response might be due to not very good reasons. It could be due to good reasons, but it doesn't matter. At the end of the day, when we want to manage a situation, we want to do our best and be at our psychological best to manage what's real rather than what is imagined. And that's what I had to do to summarize today. Alex, you want to add anything from your mirror board?
So there.
But thanks, Alex. The mirror board is really useful. I mean, it helps us to visualize the relationships.
Yeah, I'm sorry that I'm not very good at this kind of visualization stuff.
Alex is visual. Alex visual.
Yeah, that's a very useful guide.
Literally need to like try to link things up. Say, well, why are we talking about this? How does this relate to what? What is impacted by this? What does this impact? And then as we start to talk about it, we realize it's a lot more interconnected than we realize. And that's why when we put it down graphically, it kind of helps to see the full picture, right? At least for me. And then that's where it's also easy for everyone to come and look, oh, based on this is basically, I guess it's systems thinking, right? So
Yes.
where in the system do we find is the, what's the term used in systems thinking? The leverage point, is it?
Yes.
So where's the leverage point that we
The
can...
fulcrum and the leverage points are basically, yeah.
So when we look at it like that, then, we know where we want to focus on so that we can, make it psychologically safe for ourselves.
I like that, because so one of the major things about learning, right, is that you feel psychologically safe. You need to feel psychologically safe before you can learn. So I agree with you on that front. Like when people know what they're looking for, it's a very different experience. And I mean, I'm still working on it for myself. And when you're talking about something so complex as what we're talking about today, because this, I don't hear anybody talking about this where you own your own psychological safety, which is something I care a lot about. Therefore, for me, I'm loving it because as much as I can put myself out there and take the risk of talking about it in a very elaborate manner, I'm glad that I have people like Alex to help support and make it easier for everybody to understand.
Awesome. Okay. Bailey. I see that. Smile. Okay.
Oh, I thought I shared my part already.
Yeah, you
did
did.
share your part.
Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you so much for the structure. I think it's important. I
Yeah.
think I need structure as well. I didn't realize it until it's placed on the map. I was still trying to follow Ethan with some
Sorry about it.
difficulty. No worries. I think it's your talent, is the ideation. It's probably low on my list. And maybe that's why I couldn't quite follow.
No worries. Everybody has the same problem with me, so it's okay. It's not just you.
It can be very conceptual and has a lot of things. So sometimes we want to be able to follow, and sometimes we need tools to do that.
All the relationships, lah. Yeah.
Usually it takes me weeks to do something like this, but thankfully Alex is doing this on the fly with me, so thank you.
Should we continue to do this? I mean, I could try to do this for future sessions.
We can do this especially for the next session where we talk about levels of vulnerability and we relate back to here.
Yeah. Okay, let's do that. I will post this on Facebook.
Yes.
I mean, it's already on Facebook as a video, but all right.
Thank you, everybody. It was a great
Thanks.
session.
Thanks everyone. I'll catch up with you all again. See you in 2
2
weeks.
weeks.